3 steps into the parking lot behind Declan's apartment when the stairwell door banged open and Sloane's voice carried down like she had been waiting for exactly this. "You know what your problem is, Jonah?" I stopped walking but didn't turn around. My truck was right there, 15 feet away, engine practically calling my name. The February air hit my face, that sharp Ottawa Valley cold that makes your lungs tighten, whether you're ready for it or not. Behind me, I could hear the muffled bass from Declan's living room, someone laughing too loud, the clatter of bottles being swept into a recycling bin. "I have several problems," I said. "You'll need to be specific. You bolt." I turned around then because she said it so flatly that it didn't even sound like an accusation. Just a fact, like saying the sky is gray or rent is too high or it's supposed to snow again Thursday. Sloane was standing in the doorway wearing a flannel jacket over a black shirt, arms crossed, breath making little clouds between us. She had paint on her left thumbnail. I noticed that before anything else, which should have told me something. "I'm not bolting," I said. "It's after 11. Some of us open at 6. You've used that excuse 3 times this month." "It's not an excuse. The shop doesn't open itself. The shop is your uncle's. He opens it half the time." That was irritatingly accurate. My uncle Mitch ran a boat repair place on the edge of Carleton Place, and I had been working there since I dropped out of my business program at Algonquin 3 years back. Mitch opened at 6 on Mondays and Wednesdays. I opened the rest. Tomorrow was Thursday, Mitch's day off. She had me. I shifted my weight and looked at the sky. No stars. Thick cloud cover, the kind that usually meant we'd wake up to another 10 centimeters by morning. "Okay," I said. "Maybe I'm just tired. Maybe—" She didn't move from the doorway. Or maybe everyone inside just stopped talking about hockey and started talking about actual things, and you decided it was time to check your phone and grab your jacket. I opened my mouth to argue but couldn't, because that was exactly what had happened. Declan's buddy Trent had started telling the group about his dad's Parkinson's diagnosis, how he'd been driving his parents to the Civic campus in Ottawa 3 times a week for appointments, how his mom cried in the Tim Hortons parking lot after the last one because she didn't want to cry at home. Everyone had gone quiet. Not sad quiet, just real quiet. The kind of quiet where people put their drinks down and actually look at each other. I had lasted about 90 seconds before I reached for my coat. "Sloane, what? You're Declan's sister." "I'm aware." "So maybe don't psychoanalyze your brother's friends in a parking lot at 11 at night." She smiled at that, but it wasn't a retreat. It was the smile of someone who had already decided to say her piece. "I'm not psychoanalyzing you. I just think you leave every room right before it turns into something worth being in." That one landed, not like a punch. Worse, like someone opening a drawer you thought you'd locked. Sloane was 27, 2 years older than me. She'd grown up in the same small-town orbit as Declan and I had. Gone to Queens for fine arts, spent a couple years in Montreal working at a gallery that paid her barely enough to split a plateau apartment with 2 roommates. Then came back last September when their grandmother got sick. She was supposed to stay for a few weeks. That was 5 months ago. Now she rented the basement suite of a house on Bridge Street, picked up shifts at the Black Raven Bistro downtown, and painted in a corner of her landlord's garage that she'd turned into a makeshift studio. I had known her for years in the way you know a friend's older sister. Holidays, birthday dinners, the occasional text in a group chat. She was always around, but never quite in the same room as me until this winter, when she started showing up at Declan's gatherings more regularly, and I started noticing her more than I wanted to. "You don't know me well enough to say that," I told her. "I know you left Declan's Canada Day party before the fireworks. I know you disappeared from Trent's engagement thing at the Legion before anyone gave a toast. Last week we were all at that cabin near Calabugie, and you drove home at 1 in the morning because, and I'm quoting you here, the vibe got weird." The vibe got weird. The vibe did get weird. People were sitting by the fire being honest. That's not weird. That's Tuesday for most humans. The parking lot felt very quiet. A truck passed on the road beyond the building, its headlights sweeping across the snowbank by the entrance. Somewhere in the distance, a snowplow was scraping pavement. "What do you want me to do about it?" I asked. "Come back inside. It's late. It's 20 minutes. Sit down, have another beer. You don't even have to talk." That's a weird dare. It's not a dare. It's an invitation from someone who's noticed you always leave before anything costs you something. I stared at her. She held it. Sloane had this way of looking at you like she'd already finished the conversation in her head and was just waiting for you to catch up. It was the most annoying thing about her, and also the thing I thought about when I was trying not to think about her. Fine, I said. 20 minutes. She didn't celebrate. She just stepped aside and held the door open. Upstairs, nobody reacted like I'd done something unusual. Declan glanced up from the couch and said, "Thought you left." I said, "Changed my mind." He said, "Good. Trent's about to lose at cribbage, and I need a witness." That was it. I sat in the armchair by the window. Trent shuffled the cards. His girlfriend Amber handed me a Keith's from the cooler without asking. The conversation had moved on to something lighter now, a debate about whether the new rink schedule was better or worse than last year's. Normal stuff, easy stuff. Sloane sat on the floor near the coffee table, legs crossed, sketching something in a small notebook she carried everywhere. She didn't hover. She didn't check on me. Once, about 10 minutes in, she looked over and gave me this barely there nod, like she was saying, "See? Nothing happened." I stayed 40 minutes. When I finally left, I left with everyone else. Sloane was pulling on her boots by the door. I stopped beside her, hands in my jacket pockets. "I survived," I said. "Barely. You looked like someone waiting for lab results." I was perfectly relaxed. "You sat with your keys in your hand for the first 15 minutes. I looked down. The keys were still in my hand now. I put them in my pocket. She noticed and almost smiled, but caught herself. "Night, Jonah. Night." I got in my truck and sat there while the engine warmed up. The windshield was frosted over. I turned the defrost on full and watched the ice slowly lose its grip on the glass. Inside Declan's building, a light on the 3rd floor went off, then another. I had stayed. Nobody had asked me to reveal anything. Nobody had made it strange, and the fact that it felt like an accomplishment embarrassed me more than the leaving ever had. Sloane texted me the next afternoon while I was sanding the hull of a Crestliner that had spent the winter collecting mouse damage. My phone buzzed on the workbench. I wiped my hands on my jeans and checked it. Sloane, 40 minutes, new personal record. I read it twice. It wasn't flirty exactly. It wasn't deep. It sat in this narrow space between teasing and remembering, and I didn't know what to do with that. I typed, "Don't make a chart," and sent it before I could overthink. Sloane, "Too late. You're on the y-axis." I smiled into my dust mask. Mitch walked by with a propeller under one arm and said, "You texting or working?" I said, "Both." He said, "Neither of those look like sanding." That should have been the end of it. Parking lot conversation, a few texts, done. But Sloane kept appearing in small, unhurried ways that I couldn't quite categorize. She sent me a photo of a mural she was working on, a lake scene with birch trees, and wrote, "Tell me this doesn't look like the view from your uncle's dock." It did. She asked if Mitch still had those old marine cleats because her landlord wanted to mount some as coat hooks. One evening, she replied to my Instagram story about a frozen pipe at the shop with, "Did you fix it, or just stare at it until it thawed out of guilt?" Nothing demanded a response. Nothing pushed. That was what made me answer every time. By the following weekend, I realized I was checking my phone for her name and pretending I wasn't. Declan caught on the way best friends do, which is badly and at the worst possible moment. I showed up at his place on Saturday for the Leafs game, and he opened the door with a look. "What?" I said. "Nothing. You're early." "I'm on time." "For you, that's early." I pushed past him into the apartment. Trent was already on the couch. Amber was in the kitchen making nachos that smelled like they might actually be good. Declan's neighbor, a quiet guy named Hugh who worked at the Hydro One office, was setting up the TV. The game was fine. Toronto was losing in the way Toronto always loses, slowly and with just enough hope to keep you watching. I had 2 beers and ate too many nachos and argued with Trent about whether the third period power play had been earned or gifted. Then, during the second intermission, Declan leaned over and said, "So Sloane's been texting you. She texts everyone. She doesn't send everyone pictures of her paintings." I kept my eyes on the TV. It was one painting. Drop it. He dropped it, but the way he dropped it was worse than pushing. He just smiled into his beer like he'd already decided something. The next Thursday, Sloane called me directly. Not through Declan, not in a group chat. My phone rang while I was closing up the shop, padlocking the bay doors in the dark. "Hey," she said, "I need a hand with something at the studio. Are you free?" I leaned against my truck. The sky was that deep purple you get in late February when the sun's been gone for hours but the snow keeps holding light. "What kind of something?" "I'm building stretcher bars for a big canvas and I can't get the corners square." "You're the closest thing I know to a carpenter. I fix boats." "Boats have corners." I drove over. Her studio was the back half of a detached garage behind a gray clapboard house on Bridge Street. She'd hung a canvas drop cloth across the opening, clamped a shop light to the rafters, and set up a folding table covered in paint tubes, jars of solvent, and a coffee mug with a cracked handle that said Kingston on the side. It was cold enough that I could see my breath, but she had a space heater running and the garage door down, which made it tolerable. Sloane was standing at the table with 4 lengths of pine and a carpenter's square that she was holding backwards. "Give me that," I said. "I had it." "You absolutely did not. We built the frame together." I measured and cut the miter joints on her landlord's chop saw while she held the wood steady. We glued the corners, clamped them, and I showed her how to check the diagonal to make sure it was true. She watched carefully, asked good questions, and only mocked me twice. While the glue dried, she made instant coffee on a hot plate in the corner and handed me a mug. I sat on an overturned bucket. She leaned against the table. Behind her, a half-finished painting leaned against the wall. Lake, trees, morning light. It was genuinely good. Not in the way you tell a friend their work is good. Good in the way that made me look at it longer than I planned. "That's the one you sent me," I said. "Updated version." I couldn't get the water right. It kept looking like a parking lot. It doesn't anymore. She glanced at the painting, then back at me. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. The space heater clicked and hummed. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Depends. Why do you do the leaving thing?" I took a sip of coffee. It was terrible. I thought we covered this in the parking lot. We covered that you do it, not why. I looked at the garage door. The wind was pushing against it, making the panels shift slightly. "I don't know. I've always been like that." She waited. Sloane was good at waiting. She didn't fill silence with chatter or redirect with humor. She just let the space stay open. "My dad left when I was 12, I said, and then immediately wished I hadn't, because it sounded like the opening line of a therapy intake. But it was out now. Not dramatically. Just one morning he said he was driving to Smith's Falls for a part for the furnace, and then he didn't come back. Sent my mom a text that night, didn't even call." Sloane's face changed, but she didn't make it about pity. She just nodded once. "After that, I kind of learned that people leave when things get comfortable. So I figured if I left first, it wouldn't catch me off guard. That makes sense. It's also stupid. It can be both." I laughed a little, mostly to let pressure off. She smiled but stayed where she was, leaning on the table, coffee in both hands. "My ex in Montreal was the opposite," she said. "He stayed through everything, even when he didn't want to. Especially when he didn't want to. He'd just go quiet and wait for me to be the one to end it so he wouldn't have to be the bad guy." "How long?" 2 years. "That's a long time to be quiet." "It is." She looked at me over the rim of her mug. "I moved back here and everyone thought I was running away. But I think I was just tired of staying in something that had been over for a year because I didn't want to admit I'd picked wrong." That hit close. Different direction from my problem. Same neighborhood. She stayed too long. I left too early. Both of us just trying to make sure we didn't look foolish. "We should start a support group," I said. "Bad timing, anonymous. First rule, always leave at the wrong moment." She laughed, and the sound of it bounced off the garage walls, and I felt it settle somewhere behind my ribs where I didn't usually let things settle. I should have been careful after that. I wasn't. Over the next 2 weeks, I kept finding reasons to be where Sloane was. I stopped by the bistro for lunch on days I knew she was working. She'd drop off a coffee at the shop when she was running errands. One afternoon, she texted me a picture of the frozen Mississippi River from the bridge downtown and wrote, "This might be prettier than your uncle's dock. Don't tell him." I wrote back. He disowned me in the boat. We weren't dating. We weren't anything with a name, but something was building in the gaps between the jokes, and I could feel myself wanting it and fearing it in equal measure. Then she asked me outright, "Sloane, there's a show at the Neat Cafe in Burnstown on Friday. Live music. Supposed to be really good. Come with me?" I read it in the shop break room. Mitch had left a half-eaten butter tart on the counter, and the radio was playing something by Tragically Hip, which felt like the universe being heavy-handed. Come with me. Not us. Not the group. Me. My chest did that tightening thing. It always did when something good got close enough to matter. I typed, "What time?" and stared at it. Erased it. Typed, "Sounds fun." Erased that too. My break ended. I put the phone in my pocket. I didn't answer that night. Or the next morning. By Thursday afternoon, I had convinced myself that not answering was its own kind of answer, which is the lie avoidant people tell themselves so they don't have to say the actual hard thing out loud. Friday came. I drove past Burnstown around 7:30. The Neat Cafe was lit up, warm light spilling out of its old storefront windows. Cars lined the gravel shoulder. I slowed down enough to see, through the window, Sloane sitting at a table near the stage with Amber. She had her hair down. She was holding a glass of something and laughing at whatever Amber was saying, and she looked so unbothered that it almost convinced me she was fine. Almost. Because right before I accelerated, she stopped laughing and looked out the window toward the road. I don't know if she saw my truck, but I saw her face change. I drove home. I sat in my driveway with the engine running and the heater blowing, and I felt something I had never felt before after leaving. Not relief, not control, just the very specific weight of knowing I had taken something that was being offered to me freely and I had crushed it by saying nothing. My phone buzzed around 9. "Sloane, okay." One word. That was worse than anger. Anger I could have argued with. Okay, was someone closing a door without slamming it? I avoided her for 4 days, skipped Declan's on Saturday, took a different route to the shop so I wouldn't pass Bridge Street. On Sunday night, Declan called. "What did you do?" "Hello to you, too." Sloane's pretending nothing's wrong, which means something's definitely wrong. "What happened?" I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. I was parked outside the gas station on Highway 7, watching a man fill up a snowmobile trailer in the dark. She invited me to a show. I didn't answer. I didn't go. Silence. Actually, I drove past the cafe while she was inside. More silence, but angrier. "That's rough, Jonah. I know. She's not gonna chase you. That's not how she works. She asked once. She's done." That was what scared me. Not that Sloane would be dramatic about it. That she would simply, quietly, be done. That she would reclassify me as someone who wasn't worth the effort and move on with the same calm clarity she brought to everything else in her life. "I know," I said again. "Then go talk to her. It's not that simple." It actually is, though. You drive to her place. You knock. You say the true thing instead of the easy thing. That's it. I showed up at Bridge Street at 9 on Monday night. The light in her basement suite was on. I could see the edge of a bookshelf through the window. The one she'd told me she assembled herself using a YouTube tutorial and too much confidence. I knocked. Waited. The door opened and she was standing there in a gray sweater, hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She looked at me the way you look at someone when you've already decided how this conversation ends, but you're giving them one chance to change the script. "Hey," I said. "Hey." No warmth. No joke. Just two people standing in cold air with the truth between them. "I'm sorry," I said. She leaned against the frame. "For what part? For not answering? For driving past and not stopping? For making you feel like you did something wrong by asking?" Her expression didn't soften exactly, but something behind her eyes shifted. "I didn't do anything wrong. I know. That's the point. You did the brave thing, and I did the coward thing." She didn't disagree with that. I deserved it. "I wanted to say yes," I said. "I wanted to say yes the second I read it. And that's exactly why I didn't." "That doesn't make sense to most people, Jonah." "It doesn't make sense to me either. Not anymore." Sloane studied me for a long time. The wind picked up, sending a scatter of dry snow across the steps. Inside her apartment, I could hear quiet music, something acoustic. "Here's the thing," she said. "I'm not going to be the person who keeps standing at the door asking you to stay. I did that in Montreal. I waited for someone to choose me and he never did, and I promised myself I wouldn't do it again. I'm not asking you to wait. What are you asking?" I took a breath. The cold burned my throat. "I'm asking you to let me come back. Not because you pulled me in. Because I drove here. Because I knocked. Because you're the first person I've ever wanted to stay for more than I wanted the safety of leaving." She didn't say anything for a long time. "That's the actual true thing?" she asked. "Yeah, that's all of it. Write in the comments. Was Sloane right to call me out? Or should she have given me more time to work through my fear?" Sloane stepped back from the door. Not all the way. Just enough. "I have tea," she said. "You can come in. But I'm not pretending you didn't hurt me." "I don't want you to pretend." "Good. Because I'm not good at it." I walked in. Her apartment was small, warm, lived in. The bookshelf was crooked in the way self-assembled furniture always is. There were paintings leaned against every wall, canvases in different stages. A wool blanket on the couch. A single lamp on a milk crate. It smelled like turpentine and chamomile and something baked, maybe banana bread. We sat on opposite ends of the couch with mugs between us. She told me that getting my silence had felt worse than a no, that she'd sat at the Neat Cafe pretending to enjoy the music while checking her phone under the table, that she'd told Amber she was fine, and Amber hadn't believed her, that she'd driven home and cried in her car for 5 minutes, then gotten angry at herself for crying over someone who couldn't even type 2 words back. I listened. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I just sat there and let her tell me what my silence had actually felt like from her side of it. And it was awful and necessary, and I deserved every word. "I'm not going to be your project," she said. "I'm not going to fix you. I don't want you to fix me. And I'm not going to pretend it's romantic that you run away. It's not. It's exhausting. I know. Do you?" "Yeah," I said. "I do." "Because running away from you was the most exhausting thing I've ever done." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Drink your tea before it gets cold." We talked until midnight, not smoothly. I had to say sorry again, more specifically. She had to tell me that patience wasn't the same as tolerance and that she had limits. I had to hear that without getting defensive. It wasn't the conversation I wanted. It was the one I needed. When I left, she walked me to the door. We stood in the narrow hallway, closer than we needed to be. I could smell paint on her hands. "Thank you for coming back," she said. But her voice was careful, like she was testing whether the words could hold weight yet. "Thank you for opening the door." I almost didn't. I know, the next Friday, Declan had people over. The usual. Pizza from Baldi's, beer in the fridge, someone connecting a speaker to their phone and playing music that nobody agreed on. Trent and Amber. Hugh. A couple of guys from Declan's hockey league. Sloane. She was sitting on the kitchen counter when I walked in, eating a slice of pizza, talking to Amber about a gallery call she'd gotten from a place in Almonte. She looked up when I came through the door, not fully smiling, but close. I sat on the stool beside the counter. Declan handed me a beer and gave me a look that I ignored. For a couple of hours, everything was easy. The loud part, the jokes, the arguments about nothing. Trent tried to teach you how to play euchre and it went about as well as you'd expect. Then, like always, the room softened. People leaned back. Someone turned the music down. Amber started talking about her grandmother's house in Cape Breton, how they might have to sell it because nobody in the family could afford the upkeep, and how she'd spent every summer there as a kid, catching tadpoles in the creek behind the barn. The room got quiet. I felt it. That old pull. The buzzing in my hands. The voice in my head that said, "This is where you leave. This is where it gets real and people can see you, and that's dangerous." I put my beer down. I looked toward the door. Then I looked at Sloane. She was watching Amber, listening, her face open and still. She wasn't checking on me. She wasn't managing me. She was just there, being a person who knew how to sit in a room when things got honest. I picked up the empty pizza box from the counter. Taking this down to recycling, I said. Be right back. Sloane's eyes met mine for half a second. That was all. Outside, the cold hit me like a wall. The recycling bins were by the parking lot. My truck was right there. 15 feet. Engine would start in seconds. Highway 7 would be empty this time of night. I could be home in 12 minutes. Alone, safe, door locked, nobody needing anything from me. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds looking at the truck. Then I dropped the box in the bin, turned around, and went back upstairs. Sloane had saved the stool beside her without making it obvious. I sat down. Our shoulders were almost touching. She was warm. Under the noise of Trent badly explaining the rules of euchre for the third time, she leaned toward me and said, quietly, "You came back." I looked at her. This close, I could see the flecks of dry paint along her hairline that she'd missed, the small silver ring on her index finger. The way her mouth was almost smiling but not quite, like she was holding it back until she was sure. I said I would, I told her. She held my gaze for a moment longer than usual. Then, she handed me a slice of pizza from the box behind her like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stayed until everyone left. Not because Sloane dared me, not because leaving would have proved her right. I stayed because she was beside me, and the room was warm, and for the first time in my life the door was right there and I didn't want it.